Yeah, go ahead and start. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 201st Coffee and Conversation. And again, it's good to see everyone here, and hopefully we'll have a lot more watching us as we now live stream our talks. But again, we're very fortunate today to have Jim Weidler join us to give us a totally different view of our typical experiences, and particularly the start of our intercontinental ballistic missile force. I'd like to highlight just our next two upcoming coffin conversations. Our next one will be Colonel Retired Tom Does, who's actually coming all the way from Colorado Springs. Tom was in the U.S. Marine Corps for 30 years and will come talk to us about his favorite topic, the 10th Mountain Division. And that's the 8th of May. And then the 22nd of May, we'll have a special presentation also in this about the history of Admiral Arleigh Burke, who had a very long, successful career in the Navy, was born in locally Boulder, ultimately well served in the Pacific during World War II, and ultimately became Chief of Naval Operations. So we will have a special talk, and that will also be the start of a new exhibit upstairs that will run for 3 months. So we hope you'll join us for that. So again, without further ado, Jim, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Jim Weidler. I was a missile mechanic up at F.E. Warren Air Force Base first started on the first operational ICBM wing, the 706 Strategic Missile Wing. We ended up being changing over to the 389th in June of '62, and they reactivated the 389th. The 389th was previously the a B-24 heavy bomber group that was one of the 6 bomber groups that participated in the Pulaski raids, and that was called Operation Tidal Wave. So, oops, I went the wrong way, I guess. Okay, we like I said, I got there in June of '61. We deactivated, and I was gotten early out in '64. We were replaced by the Minuteman, the Minuteman I ICBM. There were about 200 of them then. We had 24 active missiles on when I was there. For the ours were liquid fuel, where the Minuteman was solid fuel. Took Minuteman. It was like we were like a muzzle loader compared to a rifle bullet, because it took us 15 minutes to load the fuel and propellants and launch. I was fortunate enough to, when I was in high school in '67, Sputnik went up, and I was in our backyard with my mom's Polaroid trying to take pictures of it going overhead, and I was 20 years old, and then that was 17 then, I was 20 years old, and I was on a launch pad. So it was quite an exciting time. I was able to participate in 4 launches in 10 months, 2 of them 3 days apart. And we were near a pad when one of them blew up at about 3,500 feet above us. We were 2,500 feet from the pad at the time. So the F.E. Warren became operational in 1967 when the in General Shriver, there for the groundbreaking. There's a Shriver Air Force Base down in Colorado Springs named after him too. And that's the plaque we recently recovered, got it to the museum. One of my old fellows I was in the service says he had taken that when they were throwing everything in the trash when we deactivated, and we returned it to the base. The Atlas ICBM was used. It was 82 feet tall, 10 feet in diameter, radio inertial guidance. The airframe was 301 Crest 301 stainless steel, Here's a piece of sample of the airframe you can pass around. This one's about 18 thousandths of an inch thick, and it's would be located. That probably came from about that area in the missile. The missile was just stainless steel. It was 10 thousandths of an inch thick at the forward bulkhead, 47 thousandths at the aft bulkhead. The aft bulkhead was down in here under the booster section, and a dime is a new dime is 46 thousandths. So that gives you an idea. It was just pressurized. We had 12 pounds of pressure in the in standby in the RP1 tank, which was about this ring area here, and then 6 pounds of pressure here. Then the pressures went up to 60 and 30 during launch. Some of the original missiles, they went on and did a big loop, and they only went up a couple thousand feet, but it proved the reliability of the airframe because the airframe stayed together. It was a 15-minute launch cycle. We'd raise the missile. We'd start loading liquid nitrogen into it, helium, RP1, which is high-grade kerosene, and liquid oxygen. We loaded the liquid RP1 at a normal aircraft does about 600 gallons a minute. We did it at 3,500 gallons a minute. And the liquid oxygen, we were at 5,500 gallons a minute. So, there were no pumps, there was all pressure. The empty weight of the missile was 25,000 pounds, and it had full weight with fuel. It was 267,000 pounds. Had a 10 to 1 fuel to airframe ratio, and then the thrust was 386,000. When it launched, it was all on radio guidance. The missile would launch out of the pad, and it'd do a yaw and roll and pitch over to the North Pole. We had the first 2 minutes of flight. The booster engines. We had 2 boosters and a sustainer engine in it. So this is a 1.5-stage missile, and it would launch after 2 minutes. We'd have BECO, booster engine cutoff. It would jettison the boat tail. Oops. It would jettison the boat tail, and it would look like this with just a sustainer engine. So that happens to be 71D that was in orbit. There's the same missile on the pad before launch. So we had liftoff, booster engine cutoff, and then after about 2 minutes, we jettisoned the boat tail on it. It went for another 3 minutes, so it only had 5 minutes of powered flight. And then their little vernier engines on the side would do final course correction, and then they would jettison the RV. And the RV went up to an apogee about 600 feet, apogee of 600 nautical miles. Yeah.
It was a single warhead then?
Single warhead. Now one of our launches we did from we would launch from Vandenberg, and we would go out. Our targets were the Eniwetok Lagoon in the Pacific, and one missile that I was on, 127D, was about 0.3 of a mile off the target, and still had enough propellants to go another 2,400 miles. The longest shot was an Atlas that went about 9,300 miles. So, and this is the factory in San Diego where they build them, and they did about 600 of these, and they fired them, and this is some of them you can see with the booster section, the boat tail rolled back, and that one's rolled back. Here it's in place because you see the engines coming, the vernier and the sustainer engine. And then I don't know if we. This is our first child up at F.E. Warren. This is Atlas 34D. I've got some pictures of it in the back on the back wall, and 34D is coming. They're pulling it in here and getting ready for transport.
And what year? What year is this?
This would have been 1959.
59.
Yeah, and this is a balancing trailer that they're rig they're putting on to make sure that it's perfectly balanced. It's getting ready for transport. The first one came to F.E. Warren overland. It did a 5-day convoy from San Diego, and you can see the security vehicles in the front. They're just some Ford Fairlanes. Not much.
Not much security there.
Then they brought it through FE. Then they brought it through downtown Cheyenne. And now it kind of looks like Cuba with all the old cars, but and here's it arriving at the main gate.
So how many missiles did you have at F.E. Warren?
We had 24 Atlas. We had 27. We had 3 in the hangar, and then 3 in the missile assembly building, and we had 24 on pads.
And that's a wing or a squadron?
Each we had one squadron had 6. The other squadron, 2 squadrons had 9 each.
Okay.
Yeah.
The whole thing's called a wing, right?
Yeah, whole thing was called a wing. The next one came by C-133 Cargo Master. And this is it being loaded in 35D, being loaded in the Cargo Master at Miramar, and then being offloaded. There was so much wind that day, I might not have the picture of it here. There was so much wind that day that the plane was bouncing around that they had to nose the aircraft against the terminal to protect it from the wind, just so they get it off. You'll see that there's not much clearance. And then we would take, periodically, we would take ICBMs. We did periodic maintenance on our ICBMs. Every 90 days we had to go out and do a minor check. Then every 180 days we did a major check on it with dual propellant loading launch. We simulated a launch with the batteries out, the warhead off, and the engine igniters out. So, and then
It looks like they're all in hooded. Is it just simply cold?
what's that?
Well, everyone's wearing hoods. And
Oh, this was in the middle of winter. Yeah, this was, yeah. And you know, but that's, when I was up in Cheyenne, we had one winter we had 37 below at the base and 50 below at the one of the sites out near Laramie, and thank God for global warming when I got older.
And remember, it doesn't blow in one week.
No, well, it doesn't, because Nebraska sucks. So here's the location of our missiles. We had the 564th was north about exit 25 off of I-25. And it wasn't I-25 at that time either, so it was 285, 287. Then we had and then the 565th they had 6 missiles on one site.
Okay.
Then we had another site, the 565th. They had A, B, and C, and they had 3 missiles on each site. The D missiles were radio inertia guidance, so they had another slide will show you the antenna. They were radio controlled for the first 5 minutes of flight. Then the inertial guidance took over. Then they changed the configuration with the Atlas-E that was all inertial guidance, and they put them on single sites, 1 missile on single sites, and
In the middle of nowhere.
yeah. Well, this one that one's in Nunn. You can go visit this one.
Wow.
That's in Weld County. Yeah. And the Fort Collins one is gone now, but that was the alternate command center during the Cuban crisis, in case F.E. Warren got taken out.
Wow.
You think F.E. Warren would be a big target?
It is.
Looking at the number of
Well, because 20th Air Force is there. Yeah. This is the 564th site out in that's north of town that I flew over. These are the 3 pads. There are 6 pads. There's a 1 launch control building right here, and that had an 11-man crew in it. And then there was a guidance building off to the side that you can't see in this photo. This pad right here is the same pictures that I have in the back. And I have a picture of those before and after. I've got the pictures from 1960s, and then we went back to the site and took pictures on it again. That's another launch control building that controlled these 3 pads. And this happens to be the fire system, because there was a water deluge system when we launched to keep the missile, try to save the pads. These pads were built after the Vandenberg models for multiple use. Our later ones in the 565th and 66 were just one-time use pads.
So these pads, were the missiles kept underground?
No,
And
we're above ground coffins.
Wow. Okay.
And
So they were all always standing there.
no, they're always horizontal.
You had laying down, and then when you want to launch, you bring it up,
Yep.
fuel it, and, okay.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was the 15-minute countdown.
And where's the warhead? Where's the bullet? When they're just sitting here and the guys are.
It's horizontal. I'll show you. There's a future slide. This happens to be Fort McGarry. This is the one out near Laramie. That was our Major McGarry. He would come to us and he'd say, "Okay, guys, when the missile be offline?" He says, "What's really wrong?" You know. So he was. So we had a sign on that one as Fort McGarry. So. And I've been involved with that because one of the things after we did our dual propellant loadings, we flushed the engines with 150 gallons of trichloroethylene. And now this pad down to 100 feet, the government says that the acceptable limits are 5 parts per billion, and it's 250,000 parts per billion.
So you guys would just let that stuff run out?
We used to wash our hands with it.
When I was with the headquarters for the Corps, our mission was to clean up.
Oh, I bet you that's a mess out there.
Yeah. And there's more of these sites around. So this site's 20 miles away from the Cheyenne water treatment plant, and the plume has moved 10 miles in 60 years. And they've got scrubbers at the plant right now. This is the configuration of the Atlas-E site. This happens to be the site that you can visit. This is the one up on Weld County. And they make arrangements so you can contact them. And sometime I do talks up there at that one too. They have a little camping area too. You can camp up in it. This is what our launch control right now at a Minuteman missile. There's 2 people in the capsule that have control of a flight of 10, and then if another capsule goes down, they can be assigned that capsule too. This took started out with a 17-man launch crew. But it took a 13-man, they reduced it down to a 13-man launch crew. There's other people in the guidance section that you don't see are part of the crew.
So this is all the 2-man control stuff here?
Yeah, this is what the 2-man control replaced.
Okay.
And so these are the status panels for those are the status panels for the 3 launch control buildings.
What year would this picture reflect?
Probably 1960, till 64. Now, I went one of the sites in Nebraska that somebody had bought one of the sites, and we went back into the old launch control center, and they had somebody had stripped a lot of stuff out of it, but they got some temporary power and put some plugs in, and they energized some of the lighting and some of these old fixtures, and the launch control still fluorescence. Still lit up. They were buzzing, but they, you know, and it's a 60-year-old lamp sitting up there. This is the antenna for the radio guidance. So you would launch one missile and track it for 5 minutes. Then they could launch the second one. And track it for 5 minutes, and then they could launch the third one.
Oh, so nothing multiple.
Nothing multiple. Yeah. Yeah.
One at a time.
And one at a time.
How long could the missile have been ready to fire once you loaded with fuel and everything?
You can keep it there for probably an hour, hour and a half. You have a problem with what's called LOX growth, because if you keep liquid oxygen under pressure, it expands, and then if you open the boil-off valve on the top to relieve the pressure, the liquid oxygen will pour down out, and then you've got contamination and stuff. Yeah. This happens to be the guidance building, or this is the launch control building for the site that had the 3 missiles on it. So that'd be the antenna, transformers. These are all the support equipment for the electronics. There would be the launch control center I showed you in that picture, and these would be the guidance people.
That's a big facility.
Yeah. And we can still go, I still have access to some of them. Here's one of our missiles on the pad. In fact, this happens to be 34D. So on this side of the buildings, these are our RP-1 tanks, our fuel tanks. This is nitrogen pressurization to get the fuel into the missile. We've got nitrogen over here on this side, and then what you can't see on this side is the liquid oxygen. There's a 30,000 gallon liquid oxygen tank on that.
So then they're just out in the open?
They're just out in the open.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody's goes up to Cheyenne or anything. There's, on West Lincoln Way, there's a saloon called the Eagle's Nest, and their sign is hanging off of one of our booms. In fact, it was painted black, but you're starting to see the color come through. So that's what it looked like when it laid in the pad.
So the missile or the nuclear warheads mounted?
Mounted
On the front, that's the white business there.
Yeah.
Re-entry vehicle.
Now, one of the sites was really nice, the 564th, because it had in-floor heat in the pads. And when we'd wait for parts, we'd go down and lay our parkas on the floor and take a nap underneath the missile. But when I was in any of the pads, any of the time, the warhead was off, the engine igniters were out, and the batteries were out.
What was the yield on those warheads?
I'm not sure. You know, that's
I think it was Mark 28, probably about about 1 meg.
yeah.
1.4, I think.
Yeah. I was
I
just.
don't know what the mark mod is. I can go online. You can probably find it online now.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
all this stuff used to be top secret, so
So-
probably go online. I think they were 1.4
Yeah.
megaton.
Yeah, if you look about secret stuff, there's a couple of, behind you, a couple of launch control checklists for emergency operating procedures that I found on eBay.
So this is
Top
inside
secret
one of the
eBay.
coffin?
This is this above ground coffin.
Above, yeah, because look at that. Doesn't look. That just keeps the weather out. maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
About it.
And these are the hold down release heads. We would, once it was launched, the missile was held down until it got 95% thrust. The Atlas-E lifted off whenever the thrust exceeded the weight of the missile. This is at the back there. This is back the sustainer engine, the 2 booster engines. This is a turbo pump that was in there, the exhaust for the turbo pump. The flame bucket down here, we have some launcher locks. And these shock absorbers took care of the hold-on release heads when they came back. And
Sorry, so what's the purpose of that middle sustainer? I'm curious, from a booster or from a launch?
these only burn for the first 2 minutes.
Okay, and then the other one is...
Then this burns for the last 3 minutes.
Got it, okay.
And then this is the liquid oxygen line that fed the liquid oxygen to a 12-inch diameter stainless steel.
But you wouldn't fill the tanks until it was vertical.
Until it's vertical, yeah.
So when it launches, is all 3 engines burning?
All 5 engines.
Or all 5 engines? Okay, so.
Because the booster, the sustainer, and the 2 verniers. The verniers only give 1,000 pounds thrust apiece.
All right, so then when the 2 boosters burn out, the center is still firing?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And it jettisons the booster section. And there's some jettison rails and explosive boats, and just because of the design of it with the drag pulls it away too. These are the umbilical cords that connect the, and I don't know who that fellow is.
How did you get these photographs?
Part of them through the San Diego Museum. I'm involved with some attorneys
okay.
representing.
All this stuff was like top secret.
Oh yeah,
back in the
and then I took some.
Okay.
I took some. I have some that I took with an Instamatic camera when we took the last missile off.
Oh, wow.
That was the camera he smuggled in.
Well, and my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law said if they would have known he graduated from the Naval Academy. He says if they would have known you had taken them, you probably would have gone to jail. But now they're happy you have them. This is what the launch control building looked like.
Wow.
So this had 250,000 pieces of support equipment for each missile. And this would be the liquid oxygen tank and the oxygen skids. This is oxygen here. The power. This is helium at 5,500 psi. We had helium rechargers were constantly bringing helium up from Denver to us. This was a liquid nitrogen tank where they turn the liquid nitrogen into gaseous nitrogen. We used helium for pressurization of the missile during flight because it was lighter weight. And that's the fuel tanks. This is the mezzanine where all the electronics were. That one would have been the pressurization unit that make sure the missile stayed at the proper pressures. If you didn't keep the missiles at the fuel tank pressure over if the liquid oxygen tank pressure became more than the fuel tank, there was it would invert the conical bulkhead that was between the 2 tanks, and that was only maybe 25 or 40 thousandths of an inch thick that separated the liquid oxygen from the RP-1.
So you used helium to pressurize the tank when it was in storage?
Yeah.
And then nitrogen?
No, we use nitrogen. We use helium later on too.
Well, what is nitrogen?
The liquid nitrogen, because inside the boat tail of the missile, for flight, were 5 round titanium bottles that were built like a thermos. So they would pressurize those with helium, and then they would flow liquid nitrogen over to supercool the helium so they could get more volume of helium in them. So, and then this is
Accident waiting to happen.
yeah. I did this presentation for the 20th Air Force, and they had, they're on the Minuteman, and they said to me, "Weren't you worried about all the hazards you had there?" And I says it was safer than Vietnam. This is the culprit. This is the that purple thing is where the 200 gallons of trichloroethylene were stored. And then when we did the purge of the engines, the missile was in a vertical position, and we purged it. We heated the trichloroethylene to about 160 degrees, and then put about 80 pounds of dry nitrogen purge after that. So it was like a vapor.
Stuff you would be involved with?
What's that?
Was that some of the type of maintenance?
Yeah,
tasks
yeah.
you would be doing?
I'd been inside the liquid oxygen tank on the missile once. We removed the boil-off valve to replace some oxygen, some level sensors. It was an exciting time for a 20-year-old kid. This is a missile out. In fact, this would have been out by Laramie, and this is a dual propellant loading. This one they happen to have a dummy warhead on it. But so what's happening here is right now is they're loading the missile with RP1. The RP1 level would go up here to about here. I can see a little vapor on the boil-off valve up there. So they're pre-chilling the liquid oxygen tank with liquid oxygen. At the same time, here's the liquid nitrogen vapor, and this is all liquid nitrogen vapor right here, gaseous nitrogen here, because they're filling the titanium bottles with helium, and then flowing the nitrogen over them. And at the same time, there was a Herman Nelson heater right here that they used on aircraft to heat aircraft, that we had to heat the boat tail of the missile with, because not only do you have the liquid nitrogen at 327 degrees below zero, you have the hydraulics and the fuel and everything else in there, and you don't want to gel the fuels and the hydraulics. Hydraulics were for engine gimbaling, and they were up to 3,000 psi. And when one of those lines would break, it'd just be the whole place would be this big pink cloud.
Did you ever have any mishaps? Any over the years that this thing was operational? Did they have anything,
Not on our site, but they had in Omaha, and I did have some pictures, but I took them out of this one. They had one. They had a fall depressurization when they had it in the vertical position, and it just exploded like a big balloon. And there's stuff all around. Anytime they did any of this, no one was on the pad.
Oh, okay.
So.
Would the thrust of the missile as it launched come out through that big opening?
No, they would come out the flame bucket in the back.
Oh.
When it went up, there was a bucket that was and then there was a trench behind it. This is one of our crews went out for a launch of 134D for JFK. There's Robert McNamara, General Powers, JFK. This Major Simonson, he was a B-24 pilot in Europe. He flew a B-29 over President Truman's inaugural parade, and he launched an ICBM for JFK. So my Frank Waters was on the guidance crew, and he met JFK. JFK came down to him and asked him, thanked him and talked to him and asked him if he was a family man. And Frank said, "Yes, sir, but I've been here for 6 weeks, and my wife is back in F.E. Warren, and she's 9 months pregnant." And JFK turned to General Powers and says, "General, get this airman on a plane back home right now." So when they went in to do the rest of the tour. And there's a video online of Walter Cronkite nightly news doing about JFK visit, and Frank's in that at about the 7-minute spot. His grandkids are just tickled to see it. But a captain came up and he says, "Your flight's ready," and he went he went over to Major Simonson, and he wanted to stay with the crew and celebrate. And the daughter was born, I think, 2 days later, like on the 25th. He got back in time.
So they would take an operational missile from the field and periodically take it to Vandenberg to make sure it works.
We did 45 of them in
45
in,
that they
in, in,
shoot over the
in,
Marshall
in,
Islands.
in 4 years.
4 years, 45.
And our base did about 30 of them.
Uh-huh.
That's how I got on 4 launches in 10 months.
Uh-huh.
And they would take not only a launch crew, but they'd take the maintenance crew too.
Right.
This is a maintenance. Happens to be the maintenance crew that came from John Gilbert. He used to live over in Hartselle, and then my old roommate here, Doug. I made contact with Doug after about 50 years, and he flew out here. And my wife says, "How are you going to recognize him?" And I said, "It was red hair, and he didn't have any."
Not anymore.
But and then this happens to be the permanent party launch crew. I mean maintenance crew from there, and you can see they're on the pad right after the launch. You can still see the vapor rising from the liquid oxygen fill lines.
That's not a very big crew, it seems to me,
What?
concerning the complexity of everything.
No, yeah, but it was really interesting. It was just, and I'm kind of lucky to. I felt kind of lucky to be on a missile crew. I've worked in the electrical industry since '59, and so I went in and they said we need electricians, and so I went through tech school. They're going to make me a reciprocating engine mechanic. And I was kind of upset, so we went up to Shepherd Air Force Base, and they read off 8 weeks of classes and 8 weeks of KP duty, and then they called 4 of our names, and he says, "You go over to this other squadron," and we went over there, and I trained on the Thor, an intermediate range missile, and then got assigned to the ICBM. So. This is the 127D I was on, and there's the information on the targeting that they have that I was able to find. This is all declassified now. And there's the impact data. And there's a place on there that tells, it would have been able to, with the amount of propellant it still had left, it would have been able to go another 2,400 nautical miles.
What was the cruising altitude of those? Once the...
At about 600 nautical miles.
Okay.
Yeah. And I never knew that until I did this for a Longs Peak middle school for a class of 7th or 8th graders, and one of them asked me what was the apogee. so I had to go look it up. And, yeah. This is Operation Tall Tree, and they took this was probably our demise. They took 5 missiles, 5 operational missiles, two of them from our squadron, 2 of them one from Omaha, and 2 Atlas-E's. And we tried to see the launches. 102D over here is the one that I passed around the piece of, and we were about 3,500 feet from that. And what came out of that is they said they had never had a successful operational launch with a B suffix guidance canister, and they thought that during the launch that the vibration of from the engines had caused the lubricant on the gyros to gel. So we launched 46 and 64D, but we had to go through recheckouts, and we had guidance canisters from Project Mercury. So they changed our guidance canisters. And speaking about Project Mercury, my wife and I were up in Vail 8-10 years ago, and it was in July in one of these Christmas and July parties, and they're selling all this knitting stuff and everything else, and the women are buying stuff for gifts, and they're probably not going to remember who it was for or where they even put it. And I saw they had all the tents, and they were equal-sized tents, and an old guy sitting in a tent with a card table, a bunch of books. And I said, John Glenn went up on 109D. What was the tail number of your missile? He says, that's the stupidest effing question anybody's ever asked me. You must have been in the Air Force. And it was Lieutenant Commander Scott Carpenter. So we talked about how he grew up in Boulder, and he grew up at 7th and Aurora, and that was his capsule named after him. Vance Brown and another fellow threw him in the pool when they dedicated the park. And we talked about going up the Dark Horse in Estes Park, and and stuff like that. And then finally people are coming around because they've realized who it was. And he says, well, thanks for bringing me all these customers. He says, I'll give you one of my books. And I went to take it, and he grabbed it from my hand, but he says, it's going to cost you $20 for an autograph. Kind of unique meeting him then. This is the launches of by the operational crews.
That's quite a few launches.
Yeah, and look at the dates apart.
Again, they're trying to proof out whether or not something's actually going to work if they have to launch it, right?
Well, it was part of our.
They're testing all kinds of stuff.
It was they were using it for different. The test vehicles were for different purposes, but it helped the crews rather than these guys sit up there now and they're just simulating.
Right.
And they do each of the wings now do maybe one launch a year. There's three missile wings now, one in Cheyenne, and one in North Dakota,
right. And they still do this. They'll take something out of the ground now.
Yeah, they still do.
Back it over to the Vandenberg and launch it and make sure the dang thing works.
Yeah. And Elizabeth Warren now wants to cancel the land-based ICBMs. And they was I heard that talk. She was in there. They're trying to, because they're trying to modernize them right now. And the problem is we're in an agreement with the Soviets, and we're limited to 400, but the Chinese aren't part of that.
Well, and the Russians now,
They cheat.
they're not adhering to it. So
Yeah.
we've signed a deal that's now essentially expired because the Soviet Union, who we signed it with, no longer exists.
Yeah.
So,
And
they're not abiding by it.
And they started with the Minuteman I in '62, and then the Minuteman III that's in there now is over 50 years old. It ended up in the end of the '60s. We had 1,000 of them at one time. Yeah. During the Cuban crisis, when we were up at the F.E. Warren, we had they talk about the 13 days in October, and JFK spoke on October 22nd. We went on alert on the 18th, and I was supposed to come down and see my brother at CU, but that got canceled. We were going to put everything had to go back in Ready State A. We took one of our Hangar Queen 39D, and my roommate escorted that out to Vandenberg, because Vandenberg sites went nuclear too.
They all went hot.
Yeah, so we had 200 ICBMs. We had 660 B-52s. A third of them were always airborne. The KC-97s and the 135s were all scattered all around the world. And then they had 150 B-58s that were paired off, 2 B-58s, each with a 2-man crew, loaded with nuclear weapons at 75 different civilian airports around the United States. So this is just that our timeline wasn't very much. This happens to be 565C. It became active in March of '61, deactivated in July of '64. These are the pictures I took with my Instamatic. We pulled it off the missile pad, and I've been going back up there now. I've done some research up there with the Corps of Engineers. This happens to be that same missile 59D. It's in one of these in the factory. I think that's it here, I'm not sure. Yeah. And here's it when it was launched. It was launched in 1965.
Was that a good launch? It doesn't look good.
Yeah, it was. This is just this is the vapor from the frost from the liquid oxygen, because remember it's on a tank that's 20 thousandths of an inch thick.
Yeah. And then that successfully went downrange?
Oh, I'd have to go.
Fraudulent?
I'd have to go. I'd have to go
Okay.
look. Some because this is what it looked like when we load them in the C-133B Cargo Master. So, and I'd been on, and you'd have to go along on that flight. One of us, a missile mechanics, to maintain the tank pressures, because if the tank pressures were off, in fact, my roommate was on one and the alarm went off, and the pilot said, "You need to go. They're getting ready to land. You need to go back and check if that's yours, because it sounds like ours. That means the landing gear is not up, or not down." No. And you can see there's really close tolerances. We'd lay rails and a transite behind it. This is ended up in Sabama, San Bernardino. They put them in storage afterwards.
Boy, they have a big shrink.
Shrink wrap.
Yeah. This happens to be 34D. That was our hangar queen. It had ended up launching a satellite, put it in orbit, and that happened. We got that missile in 58, and there it was launched in 65, I think, 65. 53E arrived in F.E. Warren in July of 61, and it was launched in November 91. And it was the 500th Atlas launch.
Well, the Atlas didn't have a very long career for space satellite.
Yeah. This is still, I've given some of these talks down at United Launch Alliance, and they've taken me out to Vandenberg, and this is the new and improved version of this is the Atlas V, and now it's an aluminum airframe. Bigger engines, they can put boosters on it. This one this one was AEHF. It's something. It's a high frequency. I forget what the A stood for. High frequency satellite, and they put 5. There were going to be 6 of them, and there were 4 in orbit. And they reset, these are up geosynchronous orbit, and they reset the other 4 so they could put this in the middle, in the proper spacing. And they'll reset those 5 when they put the 6th one up. So we were on LC-41 at that time. And then I went out for Muso 4, and that's what a launch looks like at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's the launch, and that's the nose of the missile going through the atmosphere as it going to orbit around the Earth.
So that's way downrange.
That's way downrange, but only a couple minutes away. Yeah.
So that tower to the left on the ground, that big light, that's the vehicle assembly building there, right?
That's good. Yeah.
That could be there.
Yeah.
So you're looking at from Titusville.
Yeah.
kind of
No.
over that.
Well, we were across when this. I didn't take this picture, but when I was there, we were across. Have you been to Cape Canaveral?
Yeah, I was there for lunch just over a month ago.
Okay, and we were on the outside the lagoon there.
Okay, yeah. We were in Titusville.
Yeah. Beautiful downtown
Yeah, they
Titusville.
wouldn't let us in. COVID's shutting down all the guest stuff because you can watch launches. They'll let folks watch launches from the visitor center.
Yeah.
But they don't do that. They're not doing that during COVID.
During the COVID, yeah. But
There's great places to watch launches all up and down the beach.
well, it was great being involved with the United Launch Alliance because we'd go right in.
Oh yeah.
And then we'd hear on the radio, we'd get, they had their stuff with launch control.
Oh yeah, you can hear everything. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and there's
Oh, yeah, look at that young guy. God, didn't trust someone that young, huh?
and I got in a little trouble for that one.
And he's wearing a cowboy hat in Wyoming.
And we weren't allowed to have short sleeve shirts. I had those from when we were in Vandenberg.
That's Air Force.
And we weren't allowed to have our shirt tailed out. And so, and then if you notice my fingers going through my pockets. So when I showed up there, my staff sergeant, Don Frank, he was upset. So he nominated me for Airman of the Month. So I had to get new fatigues, and I had to go up on stage. And then he enrolled me in NCO prep school. and then I had a big decision. It was to re-enlist or go get a '65 Mustang convertible. No. So I'm still involved up in Cheyenne at the Air Force Base. So, any questions from anybody?
What color convertible did you get?
65 Mustang 289 Hypo, 271 horsepower.
What color was it?
Burgundy with a white interior.
Oh, wow.
Did everything but turn and stop. My brother and I went across Nevada, 6,300 RPM in fourth gear with the top down. We figured we were doing 126 miles an hour, and it got about 8 miles a gallon.
That's about the only way to go across Nevada.
Yeah.
One thing I would just add to your comment about NOE talk, I ended up having to go out to Kwajalein with our head of his military programs director. And in Kwajalein Atoll is one of the target areas for our missiles as well.
Yeah.
That's where they dropped the MIRVs in,
Yeah.
and the bus too. Yeah.
And they have pictures of that where they said every time there'd be a test, they'd let everyone know. So the families or whoever you're there, you get out there and sit around the beach area, and you could watch the MIRVs come in. You actually could see them because they heat up coming in. And they had several marvelous photos showing kind of a atoll and these fingers just coming in through the sky.
Yeah.
And you just think what they represent,
Yeah.
you know.
So I have a classmate who was the range commander there, an Army officer, and he would tell stories about that where they go to the beach and watch. And you not only have the MIRV, but people don't realize that some of our platforms have multiple warheads on something called a bus, and that's where all the guidance is. That's one of the most complicated things that man has ever made. So they can bring that bus. You don't want that falling into the ocean because the bad guys will get it, and then they'll reverse engineer how we do it. And they bring that right into the atoll also, and then they actually get that out of the water. The MIRVs, they don't get out of the water when they hit, but that bus they want to keep because they don't want the bad guys going and getting it. They get it out of the water with a submarine. It's the only submarine the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Army has. They have their own submarine to get the bus out of the water. What's left is all damaged.
There's one of those MIRV warhead platforms on display at F.A. Warren for the 10 10 warheads.
Yeah. They have a good museum down in Albuquerque too, right off I guess it's on
Yeah.
the Atomic whatever museum. They show a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I think they have an Atlas out in the backyard there.
And I think it's a Titan.
That's a Titan.
Yeah. There's a Titan. There's a museum up in Evergreen, Oregon that has a couple of. They've got one Titan vertical and one Titan horizontal. And I happened to talk to one of the fellas there, and I said to him, "I'm running out of time."
No.
Yeah. And I said, "There's a story about the first Titan commander in Little Rock." I said he was a pilot during World War II in I forget what the twin engine fighter they had at that time.
P-38.
He had a P-38 and he was shot down in Papua New Guinea. And he turned out to be the commander. And I said, "Did you ever hear that story?" And because it's on, I was trying to think of what his name is. Yeah, it was on a History Channel. And he says, "You won't believe it, his son was my wingman."
Huh.
Oh
my goodness.
Yeah. And he said, "I didn't think anybody knew that story." So.
Well, any other final questions right now?
Kind of a war story for these missile guys.
Well, yes. Yeah.
We used to have exercises with the SAC aircraft, I was flying buffs. We'd go out and they'd ground all the airlines, everybody's grounded, and then we would penetrate and air defense guys supposedly find us. But So they had one of these, but they didn't coordinate with the missile guys. And so when we were coming in at about 1,500 feet over Vandenberg, you guys did a launch. We could read the printing on the Atlas as it went up.
Do you know, one of the other portions on the Cuban crisis, when I was saying we went on alert to on the 18th, and we stayed on the 13 days, we stayed on alert and restricted to the base till the 27th of November. And General Powers on about the 23rd or 24th came over the PA system SAC-wise and announced a non-coded message, because I think they wanted the Soviets to know that we were going to DEFCON 2. First time we'd ever been to DEFCON 2, and only time. Yeah.
Well, Jim, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
For us, and we wanted to present you one of our challenge coins.
Okay, well, thank you much. Well, it was a pleasure.
So please stick around and look at the photos and stuff and talk with Jim some more. So thank you again for joining us today. Great. No,
Okay.
that was fascinating.
Great, thanks. Here's a